The second stage tank's now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Can you tame wild women? Can you tame wild women? You made a tiger stand and eat out of your hand. You made the hippo do the flippo. Honest, it was grand, but can you tame wild women? So they'll always lead a sweet and simple life, with a wild, ferocious glance that pierced him like a lance. You made the grizzly bear get up and do the hula dance, but can you tame wild women? If you can, please tame my wife.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen.
Recently, has-been Hollywood personality Alyssa Milano responded to the legislative process in 2 states where she is not a resident by calling for the women of those states to use a sex strike as a weapon against their male partners in an effort to control their votes. While she got some enthusiasm from other Hollywood harridans, public reaction to the falling star's call for an army of wokeness was, at best, mixed. In fact, enough women found the idea more insulting than enlightened to leave its originator's ears and her reputation singed. Attempting to salvage something from this colossal failure, Milano dove for the standard excuse victim identitarians use when they discover that rebranding horse droppings as nuggets of wisdom fools nobody. Hey, at least it got a conversation started. And therein lies her idea's greatest failure, as well as her own. She does not understand the conversation she started at all. For instance, did she mean to call lesbians everywhere largely politically irrelevant? Can't boycott what you weren't buying anyway, can you? After some examination of the way establishment media usually handle such deep and compelling issues as feminist ideals and social conflict, it has become apparent that this lack of understanding might be due to a language barrier. Therefore, in order to better present the situation in a way a victim identitarian might understand, here is the gist of it in the style of the illustrious, highly respected political journal and cat blog, BuzzFeed. Behold, a Badger Listicle. Top 10 things Alyssa Milano accidentally said in the subcontext of her call for a sex strike. By Are You Kidding Me? HBR staff.
Alright, so, hello and welcome to HBR Talk 86. I do not think it means what you think it means. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren B., and She Who Must Be Obeyed, Karen Strawn, and we're going to do something a little different today. Of all the weirdness we've covered, this story takes the cake, so we won't be playing the opening video in one shot, but instead going through individual parts, one at a time, to give my co-host time to respond. But it wouldn't be an HBR broadcast without the usual shill, so if you don't know why BadgerFeed.com is important, you're already out of the loop. You can fix that by going on over to BadgerFeed.com and registering to receive notifications. Do not make me turn this live stream around and broadcast all the way home, guys. Also, if you want to support our work, even in the midst of all of the financial blacklisting that is taking place today, and it's getting pretty bad, FeedTheBadger.com is still the most stable way to help. So remember, information is power. We have it. Go to BadgerFeed for information and feed the Badger to help us share that information. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Grab some popcorn, throw open the gates of reason, and unleash your friendly neighborhood badgers on Normie Society. It'll be fun, entertaining, and educational. Just like this listicle. So, listicking on, guys. 10. Pro-choice doesn't always mean pro-choice.
Supporters of legalized abortion call themselves pro-choice. The term would indicate not endorsement of the procedure, but support for both a right to use it and a right to reject it. Milano demonstrated an apparent limit to how many people's rejection of abortion pro-choice advocacy can abide. As soon as a community rejects it, suddenly choice is a bad thing, and those who made it must be punished. How? Oh, hypocritical.
All right, so that's the first part. Who wants a crack at that?
That's what she was proposing the sex strike over. She was like, okay, so if you're not gonna give women choice over their bodies after sex, then we're just gonna exercise their choice to not have sex with men. And like the whole argument is completely stupid. Okay, this is the idea of a sex strike, on the part of women is like completely new. Nobody's ever thought of it before. Lysistrata. But, those ancient Greeks were like way ahead of their time, apparently. But she's essentially saying, if you men don't give us what we want, what we, the pro-choice women want, then we'll stop having sex with you. Like, how does this even address the topic of pro-life women, right? And the fact that even among pro-choice women are more in favor of reasonable limits placed on abortion than pro-choice men are, right? So, like, even among those who are pro-choice, women are about equal in number, but they're also more equal. Women are more likely to actually want restrictions placed on abortion. So things like the heartbeat bill, right? Or things like nothing before 12 weeks or whatever, right? So you're looking at, like, these women are asking men for something that they can't deliver, right? Because men cannot deliver blanket abortion rights all the way up to like your due date and maybe beyond, right? They can't deliver that because, roughly 48 or 46 or 45% of the country, both men and women in almost equal measure, oppose those things, right? They oppose abortion in the first place. And then among pro-choice people, women are more likely to want limits.
Exactly, but that's the whole thing. Like, she is just ignoring the fact that women also don't really necessarily agree with being pro-abortion. I mean, it's they look at the fact that there are more men in government, right? There are more male politicians. That's fine, but there are more women who vote for these people to be in position in the first place. And these women also have a voice. If they do not agree with abortion and they vote against it, then I'm sorry. It's not the men who are doing this. It's not the men who are at fault or what you feel, it's not them that you blame. But you can't point the finger at women. You can only point the finger at men. And so this is where we are. And well, that's why she's using this whole sex thing as a tool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this doesn't necessarily point to her like just ignoring pro-life women. I think she's essentially probably completely unaware of them. Like, I think she, or if she is aware of them, she's thinking, well, these women have internalized patriarchy. They've grown up indoctrinated within religious communities, and they have internalized misogyny and all of this other stuff, right? Right. So they're victims of their conditioning. Essentially, they all have Stockholm syndrome, right? So, I mean, she's, but what is so frustrating to me about this debate is that the left consistently frames it as, old, straight, white men wanting to control women's bodies. And that's absolutely not what this argument is about. The argument is about, when is a life a life? When does it actually have rights? When does it deserve the protection of the law, right? At what point does it deserve human rights, right? That's what the argument is about on the pro-life side, right? And there's all kinds of morality mixed in there, because there's abstinence-only education, and there's all kinds of other like sexual mores that get introduced into the mix, right? Well, if you didn't want to get pregnant, you shouldn't have had sex and things like that. But at the same time, the argument, the kernel of the argument is on the pro-life side is when is that fetus, when does it constitute a person? If left alone, it will become a person, right? So even if it's not a person right at conception, it will become a person if you choose to take no action, right? And this is one of the things that I think, really kind of, I'm going to use capitalism and communism as an example, right? Okay, so you have a private citizen, and he chooses not to give spare change to a homeless person, and that homeless person dies, right? Is that person who refused to give spare change to him responsible for that? That was an inaction. Whereas when you're looking at the communists and the kulaks, they were like, yeah, we're going to confiscate everything you own and all of the produce you grow, and we're actually going to make it illegal for you to harvest what little is left, the seeds that are left in the dirt. We're going to make it illegal for you to do that, to feed your family, and we're going to take an intentional action to starve you, right? So it's inaction versus action, and I think that that's a big part of the debate that really hasn't. There's nothing horrific about having a miscarriage through no fault of your own, right? There is something horrific about choosing to miscarry, and I'm going to say horrific, yes, right? That doesn't necessarily mean I'm not pro-choice, but there is something atrocious about choosing to miscarry your own child, your own fetus. There's something awful in that, and I can give you a completely non-religious argument when it comes to that kind of thing that I think a lot of people might appreciate, an atheist argument in favor of that position. But like the left just will not freaking see the argument for what it is. They won't.
They don't really want to. This is something that I've had a rough time with pretty much all of my life, because I became aware while I was still in school. So everything I learned about gestation was still incredibly fresh in my mind, right, when I learned about abortion. So a lot of the bullshit that gets inserted into the abortion discussion really just kind of, I just sort of shoved it aside, because it didn't have any impact for me, both on the religious side and the pro-abortion side. And like, if I state my position to people and I don't use a label for it, 9 times out of 10 they'll say, "Oh, you're pro-choice," and because I don't like addressing it with law. And it's not that I don't like addressing it with law because I think it's not murder. It's that I don't like addressing it with law because I tend to favor a practical approach to things that will actually accomplish something. And I think education is more important in this case, because women have been lied to for 100 years about this, basically. And it's one of the things that really bugs me about both sides of the movement. You have one side that is dominated by a religious outlook that isn't convincing to their opponents. And you have the other side that is dominated by an outlook that doesn't acknowledge the science of the situation, which is that we are dealing with a living human organism that is in its earliest stages of development. That's the underlying thing, no matter what you say about the personhood argument, which I completely reject, for the same reason that I would reject the 3/5 compromise. I reject personhood arguments as an excuse for anything that, if you accepted this as a person, would be considered a violation of their rights. If you're dealing with a living human organism, personhood is irrelevant to me. But I would absolutely, like, Neat Scholar has a great comment that just came up. I will always say abortion is a horrible mistake that women should have the right to make, and both sides hate me for it. I'm pretty close to that. I think abortion is a horrible mistake that women should have the right to be fully aware if they make it. And unfortunately, a large part of what's happened in the last 100 years is disinformation has been used very effectively to convince a lot more women to make that horrible mistake. And I think that's it's something that history is going to look back on America in particular, and during this century, because it's the U.S. really has pushed abortion all over the world, and it's going to not be pretty for us. It's going to be just as egregious, if not worse, as our historical memory of slavery. And, because this is essentially destroying the helpless. But in terms of pro-choice versus pro-life, like, I have my outlook, and a lot of other people have their outlooks, and I'm able to discuss it with a lot of people on a level of, these are the indisputable facts, these are the disputable facts, this is where we disagree, and this is where we can agree. And like, I can agree with people who call themselves pro-choice that the law isn't the best way to address this issue.
Agreed.
Where we disagree a lot of times is the scientific criteria for what constitutes a living organism and what constitutes a human organism should apply regardless of the organism's age, and we should not start using more easily warpable ideas like personhood just because we want to promote this idea. You're right, Adam. That's I got it in the reverse. I would be against treating human beings as 3/5 of a person in order to promote slavery. But in any case, I would compare the personhood argument in abortion to the personhood argument in the promotion of maintaining the slave state. And I honestly don't really see any difference between the two, other than the fact that it's easier to promote the personhood argument in abortion because you're not looking at the living human organism you're talking about.
Yeah,
exactly. And I just want to point out, how weird is it that, when it comes to a human life, these people who are so flippant about it being a human life are the same ones who will go on to say Black Lives Matter. And
no,
you know what I mean? And then once you're here, every little tiny thing about your personhood is so important.
Sacrosanct. Yeah,
exactly. But a fetus, an embryo, it's just whatever. If it's a woman's choice to get rid of it, it's whatever it needs to be. If it's expedient to get rid of it, then that's what we do. And
it's a weird kind of thing, right? Because I was just watching, while I was doing some housework, watching some Sargon of Akkad videos today, and he's been on the campaign trail. Voting is taking place for a member of European Parliament today, and the results will be available tomorrow. But he uploaded a video today about the Rotherham, there was a report, like an official report on the Rotherham grooming gangs, right? So in the UK, so you had this group of Pakistani Muslims, Muslim men, who were preying on mostly underage girls in care. So underage girls who were part of the foster care system, who were known to child services, who were, had a social worker attached to them, all of this stuff, right? They were troubled girls, some as young as 11, right? And apparently Gordon Brown, who was the leader of the Labour Party at the time and was, was he prime minister? I'm not sure. But Home Office, under his orders, essentially sent out a memo, according to a city councilman or a police officer whose name is definitively not British. It's definitively from South Asia or the Middle East, right? According to him, this person at the Home Office sent out a memo to all the police in the area saying, well, these 11-year-old girls, they're doing this. They're having sex with these men out of their own choice. And so it's not a matter for the police. So you're to leave it alone. Okay. And then you have someone like Sargon who's been trying to call attention to this issue, right? And this issue was never addressed. It wasn't addressed for like more than a decade. 1,400 girls in one city alone, right? Sexually exploited by these gangs, right? Shipped all over the country and raped hundreds of times and administered drugs to get them addicted so they'd keep coming back, right? From the age of 11, 12, 13, right? Troubled girls. And these girls would often find themselves being the ones arrested, not the men who were doing this to them. So the police would come to a house and find a bunch of adult men and a 14-year-old girl who's like high out of her mind. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, we're going to arrest her for prostitution and drug possession. And all of the men are, we're not going to touch that, right? And the reason why in the official report by the government, why this was allowed to go on for so long was because all of the officials and all of the police and all of the politicians were terrified of being considered racist against Pakistanis.
Because, of course, it's not racist to decide that it's just part of their culture to rape young girls, and therefore when they do it, it should be tolerated. Not racist at all.
I know. And then on top of that, we have the issue of these men who have been tried at their trials have actually said, well, these are just white girls, they're trash. They're non-Muslim white girls, they're British girls, they're trash, right? They're worthless, and so that's how we treat them, right? So I'm like, okay, so that's what's going on. The officials aren't going to freaking do anything about it because that would be racist, right? But then Carl Benjamin says in a live stream where he's talking to a 17-year-old promoter of pedophilia. Okay, and he's just like, okay, so I'm going to talk to this guy and I'm going to find out what the fuck kind of fucked up shit he's about, right? Because this is a guy who's like, yeah, no, 3-year-olds can totally consent to sex with adults, right? Is Amos Yee, right? And Carl talks to him and says, okay, well, so there have been examples in history, the Greek pederasts and all of that stuff, right? And that I wouldn't necessarily consider that 100% an exploitative relationship. And I'm sure that there are situations in which somebody who's 15 rather than 16 who has sex with an adult in Britain, right, is not being exploited. And I would expect that, all of the mitigating circumstances would be heard at the trial and that the judge might go more lenient on the offender in terms of sentencing, right? But I think that the age of consent is perfectly fine as it is at age 16. I don't think it should be lowered. In fact, I'm almost thinking it should be raised because young people are so immature these days, right? They're held in a state of suspended childhood, and maybe they just are not capable. When you look at the behavior of university students and stuff, maybe they're not capable of making these kinds of decisions for themselves, even at age 16, right? So that was his statement, and he gets called a pedophile apologist, right? Gordon Brown doesn't get called a pet. He's a Labor Party guy, right? He doesn't get called a pedophile apologist, right? The only Labor Party individual who got called anything bad was the woman in the Labor Party. I forget her name, but she blew the whistle on the whole thing and said we actually have to address it, and we have to address the question of race.
And
not
she faced,
necessarily.
She
not
faced backlash for that.
Oh, huge. She had to leave. She had to step down.
Oh my gosh.
Right? She said the question of race, right? Not necessarily the race of the perpetrators, but the fact that the reason that they weren't prosecuted was because of their race. The fact that the reason nobody called them on it, nobody stopped it, was because of their race. Because nobody wanted to be called racist.
No, and that kind of guilt tripping actually gets used a lot to promote acceptance of the abortion industry, really, and acceptance of things in the abortion industry that wouldn't be accepted in any other argument. Like, here in the U.S. we have our age of consent and everything, and you cannot allow your child to be in a sexual relationship at 15 years old. You can get, as a parent, treated by the state as a neglectful parent if it's proved that you knew your child, your 15-year-old, was involved in a sexual relationship, even with another 15-year-old. If you let that happen, you're responsible for it. Your school, your child's school, the school nurse cannot give your child Tylenol for a headache without a doctor's note. Right, but the school guidance counselor, who has no medical knowledge, might not even know CPR, can take your 12-year-old junior high student for an abortion and not tell you under state laws that exclude parental consent laws.
It's insane.
And then the abortion industry will exploit parental consent laws. One of my friends that I grew up with got pregnant, and this was a bad situation. This was she was 15 and she got with a 23-year-old who had a harem of teenage girls. This was really actually there's the SJWs that have been kind of busted for being predatory and having boundary issues and stuff all kind of remind me of, like, there's people who act like that have personal characteristics in common, right? But her mom did not want her to become a mother, didn't even want to deal with adoption, nothing, and forced her to have an abortion. And the doctor at the clinic actually used Ohio's parental consent law to convince the girl that she couldn't refuse. You have the right to refuse medical treatment. It is a fundamental right in medicine. But this girl, at 15 years old, what did she know? And this was a horrible situation for her. She was threatened with being wrestled into submission and strapped to the table, and the abortion performed on her against her will if she didn't cooperate. And there she is with this doctor and the doctor's staff and her mother all around her, knowing that she can't escape. And that's how her abortion went.
Oh God, that's awful.
Yeah, it is. And of course her mother later on was like, now she regrets it, but it's too late.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking at it like, so I'm friends with this woman on the north tip of Vancouver Island, and she says, run into each other and her eyes are all red and puffy, and I'm like, hey, is everything okay? And she says, honestly, if my daughter hadn't asked me for a ride down island to have an abortion, I would never know she was even pregnant or sexually active. What the fuck is that at age 13 that the doctors are forbidden from telling me not only that my daughter is pregnant, not only that my daughter has asked for birth control, not only that my daughter is pregnant, but that my daughter has had an abortion. They're forbidden from telling me. I would not know any of this if she hadn't come to me and asked me for a ride to get it done.
Christ. My cousin had her first one when she was 13. Went on to have 5 more. So,
what?
Yes. And
Like, how do you not learn a lesson?
She is younger than me, Karen. She is younger than me. She had her first one at 13, 5 more. And it's just okay. Just okay. Just nobody says anything.
That's partly why. That she started that young is partly why she has had 5 more. Since nobody is able to advise her, and most of what she's hearing about it from people who actively want to sell it to her because they make money at it, right? So of course she's going, and it's easier for a teenage girl to just accept that, because they know they're going to be, it's very hard to go through a pregnancy and give up a baby for adoption. It's very hard to be a single mother. It's very hard to try to pave a relationship, where one isn't solid, right? And to pave it into place where one isn't solid so that you can raise your child together. So the choice of least resistance is going to be abortion. And if everybody that she gets advice from is saying, this is what you have to do, if you want to be okay.
Okay,
that's not good.
Okay, I come from a family with a history of super fecundity. Okay? Like, my mother, she would just tell my dad, if you want to get pregnant, tonight's the night. And then she'd be pregnant. Right? My sister got pregnant at age 42 while using a condom.
Jesus.
Okay. I got pregnant with my, I don't call him this to his face, but I affectionately refer to him at times as my sponge baby, because he made it through the contraceptive sponge. Right? On a single day was the one time I had sex within a 6-month period of time. And it wasn't even that I wasn't like having sex or like didn't want to have sex. It was just like his parents are visiting. Now my parents are visiting. Now he's sick as a dog. Now I'm sick as a dog. Now the kids are sick as a dog. And it's like, it was just like, no, it's not happening. And then all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, let's do this thing. Insert my sponge. And yeah. Like, my eggs, they're total floozies. Total floozies. The sperm don't even have to buy them dinner. Right?
You
just give it up.
I think whatever is in my blood, we have to like draw it and bottle it, because it must be the antidote to whatever the fuck you have. Because
no, it just runs in my family. Like I literally told my doctor when I first went off the pill, when I first got married, I said, I said I went off the pill, and he said, are you trying to get pregnant? And I said, well, we're not trying. We're just assuming, like, we're not trying. Like, I'm not like performing gymnastics and sleeping with my ass up in the air, hoping to get pregnant, right? We're just hoping it'll happen, right? And assuming it will. And he says, well, if you're not on birth control, you're trying to get pregnant. I'm like, okay, fair enough, right? I was pregnant within like 3 weeks of going off the pill. Right. And then I had my first kid, and within, I was still breastfeeding and not having my period. And wouldn't you know it,
Irish
got
twin?
pregnant.
But we're still in a situation though where like that all results from having sex. But and of course the upshot is, you know, what advice you get when you're pregnant, if you're pregnant out of wedlock, which is a completely different issue. And it sort of sticks with that. We're still on number 10 of 10.
I know.
And
just gonna
the thing I wanted to point out was what
move on.
she had mentioned, you know, with you know, the multiple abortions and everything. Even if you get pregnant, incredibly easy. So say a 13-year-old girl gets pregnant, the first thing is the advice she gets from the people around her. And if she has an abortion, that's not where the advice should stop, right? And my story, for instance, about sticking my toes in hot coals, right? And again, I'm not going to go through that whole story again because time, and nobody really wants to hear that again because it's painful. But once the emergency part of it was over, once everybody knew my foot wasn't going to fall off, I wasn't going to die of third-degree burns to the calluses on the bottom of my foot and all that, everybody said the same thing to me. You know, some variation or another on what did you learn?
What
you won't
the
do that
fuck
again.
is wrong with you?
What were you thinking? You know, you won't do that again, will you? And that was the thing that's lacking a lot of times with young women who get pregnant and have a whole bunch of abortions, is nobody comes along and advises them. All right, you keep getting into this situation, and this solution that you're using, even if we accept it as an ethically correct, morally correct solution, is still not good for you to do to yourself over and over again.
No.
So you gotta fix that. You know, what can we do to not get in this situation again? And that's lacking because it's not pro-choice to help women avoid abortion.
Yeah.
So on to the next point, though. So here we go.
All right, yeah.
Let me take us back to the video scene. We'll go back to the big video scene here. Number 9. Hollywood elites feel entitled to talk over the nobodies they claim to represent.
As we pointed out last week, the people of Alabama and Georgia voted, maybe based on their opinions, maybe party loyalty, but by their own guidance, as is the right of every voter. With a tweet demanding the women of these states try to use relational aggression as a means to manipulate the vote, Alyssa Milano admitted she doesn't believe in the right of average citizens to decide for themselves whether a particular candidate deserves their vote, especially if those citizens are men. Elitist much, Alyssa? Sexist much?
So one of the things that really struck me with respect to this part of the discussion, like, and Karen already brought it up, this gets presented all the time as poor, downtrodden women, mostly of color, right, versus old white men. And the fact is, everybody has the right to vote their conscience. You know, and getting told that just because you're an old white man, you don't, is rather unique in this situation. So that's why I wanted to bring this point up.
Well, I also think that in terms of the effectiveness of this sex strike, I'm guessing that most of the women who would participate in this are married to or dating men who also support, you know, who are also pro-abortion, right? Like people form relationships a lot of the time along compatible political opinion, right? There may be some differences here and there, but there's usually a lot of common ground politically between men and women who engage in long-term relationships. So, she's basically asking a bunch of pro-choice women or pro-abortion women to deprive their pro-abortion men of sex. And none of the pro-life men are being deprived of sex because the pro-life women are being like, fuck Alyssa Milano.
Oh, yeah. In fact, they're more likely to conceive a child right now just in...
out of spite?
Yeah, not necessarily out of spite, but in defiance of, you know, oh yeah, you want a sex strike? Guess what? I'm going to go screw my husband right now.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm blown away by she's just dumb, right? And here, let me just bring into the, I don't know if it's part of your listicle here, but bring in the issue, right? Alyssa Milano, you're old. You're old,
That she is.
right? You refusing to have sex, like, I don't think there are any David Beckhams beating their frickin' way to your door, to your boudoir door. No less Bette Midler. Bette Midler is like, I'm joining Alyssa Milano in this sex strike. And it's like, did anybody ever want to have sex with you in the first place? Right?
Who's
like-
fucking Bette Midler? She,
she's like 60 or some shit.
Yeah,
she's 60 or some shit.
Back in, like, the
that's
60s, she
Madeleine
went by.
Albright. That's like Madeleine Albright saying, I refuse to have sex with anybody ever again unless I get my way. Right?
It reminds me of that old
There you
picture
go.
from the temperance movement with those sour, dour-looking middle-aged and older women in the big sign, lips that touch liquor will never touch ours. You're like, oh God, I'm going to start drinking right now.
Yeah, no. It's like, and I'm thinking to myself, stop, dog. I'm thinking to myself, like, who do these women think they are, right? Like, these are women who are, and it's a very strange phenomenon among celebrities, because Alyssa Milano used to be like super hot. So did Rose McGowan, right? So did Asia Argento. So did a lot of these women. They used to be super hot, super like freaking sexually attractive to men, and then they hit the wall, right? As the pickup artists say, and the MGTOWs say, they hit the wall, right? Age 35, age 40, age 45, right?
The wall hasn't fallen on them.
Yeah, all of a sudden, they're not getting as much attention sexually, and then all of a sudden, they're taking some kind of stand about women's sexual autonomy. Right? Because now they can't use their sexuality to get what they want. Right? Like, I honestly think that's Rose McGowan's freaking thing with the Harvey Weinstein thing. Right? Oh, I let him give me oral sex, and that was like rape, in exchange for a part, and that was rape. Yeah, no, I think that's, you're old and irrelevant, talentless, and going nutty. Right? And you've decided that this is your new path to relevance, is to essentially say, my body is sacrosanct and my body shall not be violated by anybody, including all of the people who don't want to violate it, because I'm old. I'm sorry. I'm trying to just be honest here.
Yeah.
Right? And it's harsh. It's harsh and it's awful. Right? But when you have someone like I forget whether it was Rose McGowan or Asia Argento, who had a long-term relationship with Harvey Weinstein after that incident, right? And benefited from all of what that entailed, right? All of what that implied. And then now she's like, oh yeah, no, that first time in the hotel room when he came out in his house coat and he was like, yeah, I want to give you oral sex. And I just like was like, okay. And then he gave me the part that made my career, right? And we made that trade. And now that's sexual misconduct, because my milkshake no longer brings the boys to the yard, right? And now I want to just lash out, and I want to make my sexuality, the sacrosanctness and the value of my sexuality, a big deal, right? That's all I think. Right, I want to artificially amplify the value of my sexuality by drawing attention to how I can portray it as having been violated. Back when I was actually, having people ask for my number.
Right, young, willing, ready, and able.
Well, not just young, willing, ready, and able, because there were plenty of young women who were not willing, ready, and able. Freaking, what's her name? The chick who freaking Gwyneth Paltrow, who named her daughter Apple. How do I remember Apple more than I remember Gwyneth Paltrow? That is in terms of names, but she turned the guy down, right? There were other actresses who turned him down, who said, no, thanks, but no thanks, right? So, I can understand that that's a problem, that the whole situation there is a problem, right? Illustrious, wonderful career, right? Where you get rich and famous, right? And then saying, oh, he raped me. The hubris of wearing dental floss on the red carpet, in the case of Rose McGowan, and then saying, oh, all of the fashion media cameras on me were like being raped.
Yeah, I totally didn't let my ass hang out in front of everybody for it to be seen.
I didn't want the attention. I totally didn't want the attention. Why I wore a dress made out of dental floss that showed every inch of my ass crack, right? Like, and not one single square millimeter of my underpants, which I weren't wearing, right? Like literally, and you're going to complain that it was the cameras that were sexualizing you, not you sexualizing yourself, not you using your sexuality to get things that you wanted, which was attention, fame, money, parts, status, all of that stuff, right? And now you're saying everybody who noticed that you were sexy when you were actually young and hot as opposed to old and nuts, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody who thought you were sexy back then is a piece of shit.
Yep, and everybody that she's talking about, of course, includes the commoner, because her fans are all commoners. You're not looking at an actress that is loved by the elites for her great performances. Not that she was a crappy actress. Like, I'm not going to say Rose McGowan wasn't fun to watch when she was at her best. She was bad. Her stuff was fun. The stuff that she got into and did. She picked fun things fun jobs to do, basically, and fun stories to portray. Right? That's good. But, and obviously maybe that more credit goes to her agent than her for that. Who knows? But the fact is that she's playing to the cheap seats, and now she's looking down on the cheap seats. And the same thing is true of Alyssa Milano. Not that she's a talentless hack. I'm not going to say that, because I've always enjoyed watching her acting. But she's playing to the cheap sheets. But yeah, she's playing to the cheap seats, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there is absolutely
sheets.
Yeah,
cheap seats and expensive sheets.
But she's absolutely wrong for looking down on the people who sit in those cheap seats and telling all of us, let me, the Hollywood elite, dictate your opinions on this issue, because you don't know what you're talking about, and I do. And this is basically like, here we go. Let's have relational aggression as our primary means to manipulate the vote, right? And you're not entitled to make that decision for yourself. And moreover, your husband, your boyfriend, you're the guy that you live with, they're not responsible to make their decisions on this matter. They're not allowed to have an opinion, because I in Hollywood know way more about everything than you. It's like Andy Kaufman would just be watching this and going, everybody freaked out when I did it. I'm from Hollywood, and it was a joke, and she's serious, and people are taking her seriously. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's that the only word that comes to mind that I can think of right now is narcissism. But Hollywood elitists, anyone who's been famous in Hollywood, they crave that spotlight. So if you're not in a starring role, if you're not, making major money in acting, then that's like when they start to espouse their political ideas, and they want attention for that. And I think there's something to that. Like, it's the attention that they get from saying, okay, well, you may not remember me from my movie role in 1988, but here's what I think about this current political situation, and I'm going to use that to capitalize and gain more attention, get eyes on me again, gain some more relevance, because that's what they're lacking.
Well, and I think one of the most telling things about this whole Me Too thing, right, that started with the Weinstein case and all of that, right, with people like Alyssa Milano and Rose McGowan and all of that, right? Have any of them touched Corey Feldman's accusations with a 10-foot pole?
No, they
have
actually
have
they just
any
sort
of them
kicked him to the curb.
Have any of them touched the fact that there was a children's casting couch in Hollywood? Right? That there were, innumerable boys and underage people
Actually,
preyed on by pedophiles and yeah.
When hashtag Me Too opened up, when that actually broke onto the Twitter scene, I spent days trying to get them to address the movie An Open Secret, which is about that that whole situation. And I kept mentioning, here's the situation. This should include everybody. Corey Feldman has allegations that he's talked about. There's actually been numerous stars they were child stars when we were kids. They're Gen Xers. Were child stars when we were kids that have come out and said these things happened to us when we were kids, and they've all been things where they were sexually exploited, or where their I guess you could say their sexuality was used on screen in a way that they were very uncomfortable with, and nobody came to their defense. Nobody looked and said, we shouldn't be doing this with children. Brooke Shields was another one. She actually played a prostitute in a movie when she was like 12 or 13 years old. And she knew she was portraying. She had a sex scene with an adult, and it wasn't a penetrative, you can see all that, but she was shown in bed enacting this, acting out this sex scene with an adult, and a definitely, obviously older than her adult. And nobody went, boy, this is really not okay.
Yeah,
until
this is gross.
After the movie was made, and then people objected. But when she was going through nobody said, we really should not be doing this to a teenage kid. And they did the same thing with what was the movie with them been trapped on the Blue Lagoon, right? She was a teenager when she made that. So there's a lot of these. There's a lot of Gen Xers who grew up in Hollywood who were one way or another sexually exploited. Now, Brooke Shields went on to have this great modeling career, and she went on to have an acting career, and then she sort of disappeared into the wilderness, right? So it goes back to that thing of, you can't necessarily say this was damaging to Brooke Shields on a level that it would be damaging to a nobody, because she did get a career out of it. But at the same time, it doesn't make it okay to sexually exploit a teenage kid. And I think the guys had it worse because, you talk about doing something like that to a girl, people get all up in arms. You talk about doing something like that to a guy, and people are like, nice.
Unless it's homosexual.
Yeah,
right.
And then they're appalled.
Then they're appalled, right? And it really boils down to if the perceived perpetrator is an adult male, then there you go. That's when everybody gets up in arms, and people are sort of able to perceive the idea of child victims of male boy victims of male pedophiles and stuff, right? I mean, the whole reason why Corey Feldman disclosed all of that to police was because he was being called in because he'd been to Neverland Ranch a number of times, and the police were investigating Michael Jackson on accusations of pedophilia. And he told them, this was in the 90s, he told them, he's the only freaking guy in Hollywood that didn't molest me. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
And nobody did anything, even back then.
Yeah.
In fact, they lost. They lost his testimony, his allegations. They lost
for
his
20 years.
interview with the police.
For 20 years.
Until, it was past the statute of limitations and nothing could be done for him. And then, we actually do have that, but now we can't do anything about it. Gee.
It was in a broom closet.
Yeah.
Who put it there? I don't know.
Under a bucket. But yeah, and this is like, so you have this elitism, particularly among Hollywood women, and Hollywood liberals. And the thing that really bothers me about it, I don't have a problem with people in Hollywood are not excluded from the right to be politically active. Everybody has the right to be involved in the political process. But don't act like you're better than everybody else. Don't act like everybody else has to do what you say because you showed your ass in a movie, or even because you're really good at fake portrayals of characters and stories that aren't really you, but you can really seem like that person long enough to make a movie. That doesn't qualify you to be an expert on anything except fakery. And even if you're great at it, and even if it's really admirable, it doesn't make you politically relevant. And it drives me nuts that these Hollywood elites are like, they'll talk over the rest of us. Oh, you can't have that opinion because we say so. I don't mind when they come out and say, well thought out or even poorly thought out, but normal argument for or against a political position.
Yeah, and I'd like to also point out, like, look at how the media treats Tommy Robinson when he tries to highlight the grooming gangs in the UK, right? But the grooming gang in Hollywood, I would argue, is even more prevalent and 10 times more insidious. And, nobody talks about it. When people try to talk about it, they're shut down and, discredited. But, Hollywood is horrible. And I really... my sister-in-law she has worked in Hollywood, and her kids, my niece and nephew, they're gorgeous. Like, they should be in every commercial. Well, that's my biased opinion because I'm their auntie. But no, I wouldn't want them anywhere near it because they feed on children. It's disgusting. It's sickening. But the people with money have the power to cover their tracks.
Well, and the people on Twitter have the power to put the focus all on grown women who made choices of their own free will.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And they're more important than everybody else. Yep. Better than everybody else. I think we can go on to the next point here. So back to our video scene. Number 8. Despite what they tell MRAs, feminists do expect women to be a monolith.
Milano's call to arms relied on the expectation that she'd be backed by the female population at large. Should only a handful of people in Hollywood answer the call, she'd be embarrassed, look silly, and maybe even do damage to her position. She wouldn't want that, would she? So she made that call on the assumption that it'd be picked up, amplified, and forwarded by women obligated to do so by virtue of sisterhood. She must have been really surprised by the backlash she encountered from pro-life women, although admitting that would have been even more damaging to her position, so she probably won't.
Numbers.
Well, there you go. I mean, essentially, there's an assumption that every woman is going to take the feminist position. Every woman is going to take engage in solidarity with, have these feminist women not learned from the whole Trump thing, right? 65% of white women voted for Trump, right? Have they not figured it out, since 2016, that not all women agree with them, right? Like, are examples like Candace Owens not enough for them to realize that not all women agree with them, and that it's not even just like only dumb women disagree with me. Because I can watch Candace Owens talking, live on Fox News, and she's freaking she is a female Black Ben Shapiro in many ways, right?
She's sharp. I think that would take some self introspection that these people just obviously lack, and that's part of that is not only part of, that is the reason why we are where we are, because they just cannot look within themselves and just take any kind of accountability for anything, and realize that, hey, maybe I'm not the only other person on the fucking planet. Yes, not every single person that looks like me agrees with me, and you shouldn't try to coerce women to agree with you just on the fact that you're a woman as well. What kind of sense does that make?
All hail the holy vag. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Oh,
Honestly, fun experiment would be, if you're on social media, you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, wherever you are, and you get feminists telling women are not a monolith, feminists are not a monolith, blah blah blah. Ask them what they think of pro-life women, and then the best part is they're not common. There's not a wide variety of them. They're not big groups, but there are pro-life feminists. There are anti-abortion feminists. The bad thing is, anti-abortion feminists, like, it's a lot like anti-abortion traditionalists. They start blaming the fathers and blaming the men that work in the abortion industry. There are female abortionists coming out the wazoo, but there are men that work in the abortion industry too. And of course, it's all about the predatory men foisting abortion off on these poor innocent women who don't know any better. But they exist, right? And it's not necessarily any healthier than the victim narrative that gets used to promote abortion or any other feminist issue. But it would be fun to confront feminists with those two groups. Pro-life women and pro-life feminists. What do you think of them? Every time they say feminism is not a monolith, women are not a monolith, because as soon as you start talking about pro-life women and pro-life feminists, all of a sudden women are expected to be a monolith. Feminists are expected to be. You have to be in lockstep about this because you have a uterus. Holy crap! What's wrong with these women, right? They're not allowed to have their own opinion. They're not allowed to draw their own conclusions.
You know what's wrong with me, right? And I am one of those hold my nose, look the other way, and say, okay, I'm pro-choice, right? Within reason. People, but I'm very anti-abortion at the same time, right? And part of it is because, when I actually sat down and thought about it, because, there are people who, who challenge my stance as an atheist, right? And say that, if you're an atheist, then how does your life have any kind of value, right? And one night, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, if my parents had had sex in a different position that night, somebody might be here, but it wouldn't be me, right? And if my grandparents hadn't met, or if my grandmother had chosen to marry my grandfather's older brother rather than him, right? My mother wouldn't have been born. And therefore I wouldn't be here. Somebody might be here, but it wouldn't be me, right? And then I thought all the way back to that sort of puddle of primordial ooze in what is now Australia and the first prokaryotes and all of that. And I'm thinking to myself, right, like if an amoeba 3 billion years ago had put out a pseudopod and exchanged genetic material with a different amoeba than it actually exchanged material with, I wouldn't be here. Like, someone might be, but it wouldn't be me. Right? And I think when I actually looked at the fact that it wasn't just that every single individual organism in that chain, from those first prokaryotes, right, all the way up, that they had to reproduce, but that they had to reproduce in a specific way at a specific time. Otherwise, things would have been different, right? That made me realize that, I have, trillions of ancestors? And they all had to do everything exactly as they did it to produce me. Somebody might have been here, but it wouldn't be me. And then I think, so I had this, when I was conceived, I was given this absolutely priceless lottery ticket, right? A cosmic lottery ticket against astronomical odds, right? Just, I would have better odds of being struck by lightning 1,500 times tomorrow than to be here. And nobody stole that lottery ticket from me. Nobody took it away. And then I look at it and I go, well, what right does anybody have to take that lottery ticket, that winning lottery ticket, away from anybody else? Because that's a person, right? Even if you have an abortion, well, that child that you had, that's not the child that you would have had you not had an abortion. That's a completely different child. Any parent with more than one child could tell you, all your children are different. Right? And so the fact that happened, right? And that's the culmination of so many things happening in sequence, unbroken, right? From the dawn of life on Earth. And you're just going to throw it away like it's just freaking, it's like swatting a mosquito.
That
I can't imagine the amount of, if you actually realize how lucky you are to be here in the first place. Because, if your parents had had sex in a different position that night, somebody would have maybe been here, but it wouldn't have been you.
That is a valid point. And it works in relation to the other information that you have about gestation that makes it quite obvious, 100%, that you're dealing with a living human organism and not just tissue, and not just chance, and not just a non-living thing. It's not a dead organism, and it's not an inanimate object. But it does make a good non-religious addition to the discussion. I think in and of itself it wouldn't be a sole argument against, because it does kind of rely on, it's not necessarily making it sacred, but it does kind of rely on, look, this is special and rare, and we value things that are special and rare. Well, the most special and rarest thing of all is the process of your existence. Even though it happens with every living thing, you specifically, the process of your existence specifically, is incredibly rare and incredibly special. When you combine that with the fact that as human beings, we place a different value on human life than we place on other life, and we have to, because nobody survives without killing. Even vegans kill things to survive.
Oh,
right?
God, constantly.
The only people that live without killing are those nutballs that only eat things that fall off of the trees and everything, and eventually they get sick. And that's perfect time, punctuated by the dog. Woof.
Yeah. Well, I thought
those people that don't eat.
I thought there was this cult in Australia called the Breatharians. Right? They were really popular in the 90s. They only lived on water and air. They said they got all their nutrients from air. I heard they died out, but
kind of like the Shakers,
not sure why. Yeah.
Kind of like the Shakers that didn't believe in any love except for brotherly or sisterly love. So you couldn't get married, you couldn't have sex with anybody, and you couldn't bear children. And nobody knows why that cult died out either.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Shocked, yes.
Shocked.
This is one of those things that there's going to be a variety of opinions among women on this, and it's not wrong for women to disagree with each other on it, but feminists would definitely, 100%, without question, feminists would all act like it's absolutely wrong for women to have a different opinion than they do. Now, I don't think it's wrong for people to have drawn conclusions that lead them to call themselves pro-choice and advocate for abortion, and even for people to advocate against informed consent. It's not a moral issue. It's a political issue. It's an ethical issue. And if they really consider that to be of great importance, maybe their conclusion is based on information that isn't factual, or maybe they've drawn irrational conclusions. But it's not morally wrong to have drawn an incorrect conclusion. It becomes morally wrong when you start lying to people to enforce an incorrect conclusion on them. But I don't oppose people disagreeing with me. I'm more in favor of robust debate on the topic. And I think feminists have kind of the opposite opinion, and I do find that reprehensible. But I'm going to take us into the next point. So, I'm going to try, I don't know if you guys can see the pictures easily, but I'm going to try this.
Even more damaging to her position.
They cannot accomplish. Let's see if I can actually use this technology. We might have to last. There we go. Feminist women think they cannot accomplish anything without men.
Milano's call was not for women to get out and vote, write or call their representatives, or do something that would override them, like gather signatures to get a referendum on the next ballot and then vote to repeal the abortion laws they disapprove, or even challenge those laws in court in hopes of having them overturned. All things that could affect change through mainly women's actions. Nope, she told women to rely on male voters and male legislators to make the changes she wants. A lot of faith in women, that shows.
Number 6.
Okay, so I just have to draw attention to the idea as well that men will do anything for poontang. Apparently, men will, according to Alyssa Milano, violate their own moral principles just to get sex, right? And then these feminists, right, who propose this, right, with a straight face, and thank goodness it was, there was a backlash about it, but these are feminists who propose these things with a straight face. Then they, when anybody accuses them of having any kind of power, or accuses women of having power within society, power over men, right? They're like, what are you talking about? We're all this, right? And it's like, but you literally just said that if you stop, like, isn't the whole feminist position that if women stop putting out for their husbands and boyfriends, then they'll just be raped anyway and nobody will care, right? Because that's how patriarchy works, right? Like, if patriarchy existed the way these feminists portray it, right, then the idea of a sex strike on the part of women would be completely, it would be like the most insane idea. It'd be like Alex Jones shouting about reptilian aliens, right? That's it would be like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Nobody believes that. Women don't have the power to do that. Their men will just have sex with them anyway against their will, because women have no power of consent, and women have no power of control over their men. Women have no power to influence their men. Women have no power in the social sphere. They have no power to dictate morality. They have no power to dictate social norms. They have no power to dictate anything, even though they're 52% of the voters. They don't have any power at all.
What strikes me about this is that of all of the options, she chose sex. Right here we have.
Well, yeah, like, because it's the most.
What is it the suffragettes get credit for again? What is it the feminists always shove the suffragettes in our face for whenever we're being told, you owe feminism. Feminism got you. What did feminism supposedly get us?
Political power.
Right. Our voting rights. Our right of suffrage. Like,
yeah, but
what value is it? What does it mean if we're going to turn around and have a sex strike when we want things instead of voting our conscience?
Well, this is the thing, right? This is why I argue sometimes that right? Because if women have the ability to influence all of society by just collectively saying we're not going to have sex with you, right? And then the men are going to do what they want, which is apparently what feminists like Alyssa Milano believe is the case, right? Then wouldn't giving us the vote give us like a huge amount of power over men? Like we already, like the vote.
How do you think welfare happened?
Yeah, we have more power than men because we're the majority of the electorate.
Well, I don't think they think
and we
that
have
far.
I think they do. I think they know this.
You think about this
because, but listen,
100% know this.
Well, listen. Okay, if they think that all men, well, not all men, of course. Hashtag not all
men in general.
Men in general are rapists, and they're just going to take what they want anyway. Why would they think that denying men sex is going to reduce? I mean, of course, it's an unintended consequence, but you think that denying men sex is going to then turn these rapist, non-rapist men into less rapists?
No. You're not getting what I'm saying. They know that if they refuse their husband's sex, if they refuse their boyfriend's sex, if they say, not tonight, honey, I have a headache. Not tonight, honey, you didn't give me your credit card to buy those shoes I wanted. Not tonight, I'm annoyed at you because you didn't do the dishes. Not tonight, blah, 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 right? They know that their husbands aren't going to rape them. They know their boyfriends aren't going to rape them. In some rare cases, yes. But in the main, no. And they can use... Like, I have a friend, okay, and I had to essentially teach her the basics of ethics and morality, because she used to, like, put the bag of kitty litter on the bottom of the shopping cart and then walk out of the store with it without paying, right? And then knowing that she could say, oh, shit, I forgot it was on the bottom of the cart, right? Okay? And she'd be like, but I get free kitty litter. And I'm like, you're stealing, for fuck's sake. What the hell is wrong with you? And then she, like, got mad at me a month or two later and said, God damn you, why did you make me have a conscience? Anyway.
Well, and that's the thing. It's a matter of laziness.
She used to say to me that if she wanted her man to buy her something, she would just give him a blowjob. And while he was in a state of existential bliss, she would go into his wallet, get his credit card out, and say, I'm going shopping, and he would just let her do it. Now, you tell me who's in control of that relationship.
And there you go. And that's
right?
sort of the point I'm making here with this particular point is not about rape culture, though. It's about the feminist supposition that women can't accomplish anything without making men do it for them, which is what you're talking about with your friend here. But there's all these means that women could use if they wanted to overturn abortion laws, if they wanted to make sure no new abortion laws would get passed, if women were a monolith, which I know we're not, but pro-abortion women could easily go out and do the things that it takes to get a referendum on the ballot. They could do the things that it takes to get their representatives. You know,
they'd rather march around in pussy hats with signs and listen to Madonna talking about wanting to White House and Ashley Judd talking about how women don't get to choose when to have their periods.
And it's because it is a lot less work to fuck a guy, not fuck a guy, give a blowjob, not give a blowjob, and then turn around and say, buy this for me, do this for me, make this happen for me. That's the point that this particular, like, number 7 here is about that point. They think they can't accomplish anything without men doing it for them. Men build it for them. Men grow it for them. Men change the laws for them. In fact, you go back in American history, the order of operations was change of custody law so that in a divorce, women get custody of the children. And then the welfare state. Back when divorce resulted in paternal custody, nobody even considered the idea. Because men didn't do things for other men, they did them for women.
Oh, yeah, no, and it's like, and the idea that, child support, too, right? Alimony was a one-way back under, in the heyday of patriarchy. Right? It was a one-way thing. No wealthy woman who married a lower-class schlub ever had to pay him alimony if they got divorced. Even if she was at fault, she wouldn't have to pay alimony because men were not... Oh, my God! Men were not considered the party who was supposed to come up in the world through marriage, right? To financially benefit through it, right? And then child support was creation of the legal system that occurred after maternal custody became the norm. There was no such thing as child support going from women to men when men got custody. No, women walked away. They walked away with nothing, right? If they were at fault for the divorce, they walked away with nothing, including their children. But the nothing that they walked away with included any obligation to anybody. Right? So you're looking at this situation where if a woman was at fault for a divorce or if she abandoned her family or whatever, she walked away, the kids stayed with dad, and she owed nobody nothing. Right? Whereas if a man walked away, he could be tracked down and prosecuted for abandonment of his family. Right? And money extracted from him to support them. That's how things worked under patriarchy. And when maternal custody became the norm, all of a sudden, even women who were at fault for the divorce got a free fucking ride after that divorce because they were the head of the children's household and the man was solely responsible for supporting that household, right? And he had to support the head of that household, right? And that didn't give him any kind of rights or anything like that. It was just like, no, these are your responsibilities. Here you go. Right? So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, like, the idea that women have never had power because these changes, right? Maternal custody by default and all of these things, child support, all of that stuff, that all occurred before women had the fucking vote.
Yep. Women getting custody, women getting child support, women getting alimony. The idea that men were responsible for women, that's what feminists trade on. They don't trade on the idea that women can go out and do things themselves. The only time they ever argue that women can go out and do things themselves is when they want to get paid for taking men's jobs. And honestly, every one of us that works, in reality, is taking a man's job. You know, now at today's economy, it might not be the case anymore. But back when it was usually, aside from the lower classes who both parents had to work because they got paid so little that if both parents didn't work, you couldn't run a household. Like anybody middle class or above, only one parent had to work. And the idea that, two parents in that household would be working in a job market that was limited, that meant that some guy somewhere wasn't getting hired. And it changed things, but it's still, something that feminists argue for women to be replacing men in the workplace. And they're still doing it. Now they're looking at positions of authority and responsibility that men are more likely to obtain because men are more likely to exercise accountability in the workplace that makes them of greater benefit to their employers than women. They want women promoted into those positions anyway. They want women promoted into those positions even if they haven't earned them, even if their accountability is so lacking that they're going to fail in those positions. And it's all, men need to do things for us. Men need to put us in these positions. Men need to fix this for us. And we shouldn't have to work for it. Men need to give us room. Yeah, and that's make room. And they can't accomplish it through their own merits and their own efforts because that would be work. So they're telling women, demand that men fix it for you. Don't have sex with them until they fix it for you. Let's get out the vote. Let's get get out the educational initiative. Let's get out the petitions for the referendum. Get men to do it for you. How lazy can you get?
That's what they're accustomed to, because think about it. Men built the entire infrastructure that makes women's lifestyle so easy these days. They are used to men just stepping up and helping out and saving them from danger. So of course, that is their go-to response.
Yep, exactly.
Well, there you go, and which essentially puts the lie to the patriarchy myth, because if
but
women
we can get into
leverage...
that when we get to the point that's actually about patriarchy, which is coming up. But I'm going to go on to point number 5, and I think this point number 5 is probably going to have to be our last one for this show. It's already 8:30. So here we go.
Changes she wants. A lot of faith in women, that shows.
Number 6. Women don't have to create unplanned pregnancies.
Whether she intended to or not, Milano reminded us that conception really is under women's control because nobody gets pregnant as a result of abstaining from sex. So a demand for legalized abortion is really an admission by one facet of the political spectrum that society is expected to mitigate the consequences of women's carelessness using any means necessary, including killing their offspring, mostly for the sake of convenience. That really softens women's image, doesn't it? It totally makes female candidates look level-headed and accountable enough to trust with positions of government authority, right?
Number 5.
Yeah, well, here you go. I made a mistake, now bail me out. I made a mistake, I don't want to face the consequences. And, I fucked up, whatever, right? I mean, I'm the first person to argue that birth control isn't always, 100% reliable. Right. And, but essentially, if you have sex, if you didn't want to be a parent, you should have kept it in your pants. If that's something that can be said to men, it's certainly something that can be said to women. Right? And nobody's even arguing. Even if a woman brings a pregnancy to term and gives birth to a live baby, right? Nobody is saying, oh, now she's stuck with it and with the responsibility. No, she has options. Even at that point, she has options. She can abandon it via a safe haven site. She can put it up for adoption, right? She does not have to take responsibility for that child, right? But the man, of course, if the woman chooses, right, he's roped in, right? She essentially gets to strap him to her back and leap out of the plane, with him.
It's the complete inverse for the man. He is subject to whatever her decision is, and as responsible as she chooses to be, he then has to step up and okay, well, if she wants to have an abortion, well, then she can make him pay for that abortion. If she wants to keep the kid, well, then he's forced to step up and live the next 18 years of his life, subjugated to whatever it is that she wants him to do. It's sick.
It's unfair. It's extremely unfair. And nobody, I don't think any men's rights activist is going to argue that, men should have the right to force a woman to have an abortion,
Right.
or men should have the right to prevent a woman from having an abortion. Men's rights activists, for the most part, in terms of the latter, are saying we should at least have some compassion for these men who don't want their partners to have an abortion and their partners do. We should at least be able to sympathize with them. And with the fact that they don't have any rights, I don't know how you could possibly adjudicate that in such a way that a man would have an equal say. There's no such thing as an equal say in a 50-50 partnership. When the two parties disagree, one has to take precedence over the other. And the woman, because of her higher investment biologically, should probably take priority, right? I agree with that. That doesn't mean that I don't think we should have sympathy and compassion for men whose partners aborted their children. I think that that's something that we should really be willing to address honestly, right? That abortion, and that you can't address honestly if you're living in a shout your abortion, pro-abortion culture, not a pro-choice culture, but a pro-abortion culture, where abortion is seen as 100% hunky-dory and the best thing ever. And you got celebrities saying, I wish I'd had an abortion, then I'd be able to really relate to the women who've had abortions. Unbelievable bullshit going on within this topic, right? I don't think it's possible to actually engage in a dialogue that allows for the humanity of men and the grief that a man might have for a child that he sired, a fetus that he conceived, that was aborted against his wishes, right? You even see, God, I forget which state it was, but they brought in an abortion bill. They brought in a bill. It wasn't even an abortion bill. It was a bill about the commitment of remains, right? So it was essentially both parents, or all the next of kin, right, if available, should have a say in how the remains are disposed of, and that this would apply to abortion. And all of the feminists this would make women have to get their partner's permission, the father's permission to have an abortion. And I'm looking at this bill and I'm thinking, all she has to do is go get her abortion and then inform him and say, do you want to donate the tissue or do you want to bury the baby? That's all it is. So she'd have to inform him at some point after she had it done, right? In order to have him have a say in how to dispose of the remains. That's all it would entail, right? And yeah, it might make some women think twice, but it does not require her to get his permission at all, period. Not even close.
And 9 times out of 10, I find they can't be honest about these arguments. There was one a while back where the law was going to stipulate that if a woman goes into a clinic and has an abortion, she has the legal right to know who the practitioner is that performed her abortion. So basically it's if malpractice occurs, she has legal recourse because she knows who did this to her, right? So, if the doctor doesn't follow standard medical practices regarding hygiene, you have to wash your hands, you have to wear gloves, you have to do all these things to prevent cross-contamination from one patient to another. The room has to be clean, all that. And an abortion does involve, it's an invasive procedure. And so if the practitioners performing it are not careful, they can do all those things: cross-contamination, introduction of bacteria that maybe isn't from another patient, but is still bacteria. They can do physical damage if they're careless with the instruments they're using. Some of the physical damage can be particularly awful, actually. And I'm not going to describe it because it's that we're getting into gore there. But basically, there are things that can go wrong. And when I was 17, I had a sinus surgery, which was really gross, and the procedure was something that it wasn't going to be necessarily easy. If something had gone wrong, I have legal recourse against the practicing physician if he didn't maintain a clean environment, if the hospital didn't maintain a clean environment, if he accidentally cut too much out of my septum, more than was needed, and screwed my nose up like Michael Jackson's nose was screwed up. All of those things, I would have had legal recourse to collect, whatever it was that would fix the problem if I had to go to another doctor and have it another surgery done because of it. But feminists opposed the regulation that gave women the right to know who their doctor was in an abortion clinic, because they were afraid that if abortion doctors could be sued when they engage in malpractice, when they injure somebody, when they infect somebody with something like toxic shock syndrome or staph in their genital area, then they wouldn't. The profits from abortion wouldn't be attractive enough to keep them in practice. Right? It was so important to protect the abortion doctor that they were willing to throw the women under the bus whose safe legal abortions were the whole reason, right? That's like the whole argument for making it legal was to keep it safe. And they opposed that type of regulation. Today, they're opposing the idea that clinics should have some sort of an agreement where if something goes wrong at the clinic, they can have the patient transported to the nearest hospital or a local hospital, and she can receive treatment there, that the doctor will have admitting privileges, so they won't have somebody die because they didn't know that she had the, vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and turns out she's going to bleed to death now. Or they didn't know she had, some other problem, and hey, now it turns out she was susceptible to this type of shock or that type of infection or whatever.
Allergic to anesthetic.
Allergic to the anesthetic. She goes into anaphylactic shock.
Yeah, why these things aren't performed in hospitals is beyond me. I don't understand it. They outsource it to these facilities, these Planned Parenthood facilities. It's not a hospital. If you have to have a late term abortion, then you stay at a hotel that's with close enough to get you there if something goes wrong. It's ridiculous. This is something that is so sensitive, so medically sensitive. This is something that should be performed under the care of a licensed physician, a doctor, with a full staff that is on call 24/7.
I just want to tell you that for my first and third kids, right? I was not allowed to give birth in the hospital in my town. And the reason why was because there was no crash cart. There was a crash cart, but there was no doctor who was qualified there to perform a cesarean section, right, if necessary. And we were 3 hours drive through unpopulated forest from the nearest hospital that did have somebody who was capable of doing that, right? And so I had to drive down while I was in labor with my first kid. I didn't follow their advice. They said, 2 weeks before your due date, you should go and stay in a hotel. And I was like, are you going to pay for that? And they were like, no.
No.
And I was like, yeah, so no, I'm not going to. I like in the middle of summer, I have my 2 stepsons visiting, right? I gotta try and scramble to find daycare for them, right? And then go down and live alone in a hotel room for 2 weeks. While my husband tries to like take up the slack working full time with my stepsons in daycare. No, at our expense, all of it at our expense. No, but essentially, the thing was that it was not considered safe. With my first, it was not considered safe because he was my first. With my daughter, they considered that to be okay. That all went fine, right? And I had her in because my first was completely without complications. So that was fine, right? But by third, he was like 27 days overdue. Yes, he's snapping his fingers and pointing at me and smiling. My 6'3", 16-year-old. He was 27 days overdue. And so they were just like, yeah, no, you can't have him. He has to go down and get induced and do all of that. So that was to protect my health, right? I have a friend who she had her third kid just not too long ago, and she went into early labor, and the head was engaged, which I don't know if the listeners you can go look it up. The head gets engaged in the pelvis. It's like the cervix is starting to open. The head's engaged in the pelvis. But it was too early. It was at 34 weeks, and they had to make her wait 2 weeks. And they kept her in hospital. And then they transferred her to another hospital where a 36-week delivery was considered to be okay. And she had the baby, and now she prolapsed uterus. You can look that up if you want to hear, know what that is, but it's when your cervix is sitting at the opening of your vagina. Because she went 2 weeks with the baby's head essentially destroying her entire pelvis, right? But they were weighing her health and the baby's health, the baby's chances of doing well, all of those things, right? These are things that doctors and hospitals do. She does not hold them to blame for the fact that she's got this issue now. She's got to have some kind of surgery to fix it, right? Because if her baby had been born at 34 weeks, it would be at higher risk for a whole bunch of different issues, including cerebral palsy and other stuff, right? And so she was just like, no, we can just continue on until 36 weeks, and then you can transfer me to another hospital where they're qualified to actually give birth to a premature baby, right? That's like, so when you're looking at, clinics are doing stuff that's this invasive, and they're not even essentially required to transfer the patient to the hospital if there's a problem. What the fuck is going on?
Obviously, the idea of legal abortions for the sake of safety goes out the window once they're actually legal.
Because
That's,
it's all
you know.
about it's all about protecting the abortion thing. It women's health goes out the fucking window as long as women can have abortions. As long as we can protect the right for, or the quote unquote right for women to have abortions, their health in this situation, whether it be negative or positive on either side, it goes out the fucking window, because that is the that's the holy grail, so to speak.
There you go. It's the holy grail.
Well, and what
Unholy grail.
Yeah, what makes it holy though, this is the thing. There's a lot of money in the abortion industry, and Planned Parenthood people will argue that Planned Parenthood doesn't turn a profit. Planned Parenthood doesn't have to turn a profit for there to be a lot of money involved. First of all, it's very easy to hide that by dividing it. It's the same way banks do, and automotive companies do, and everything. They distribute the money that comes into the company in ways that looks like they're not really profiting, but they're still taking in a lot of money, and a lot of the expense involves paying their personnel. The personnel, abortionists and so on, they're making a lot of money. You want to get somebody to work in an abortion clinic, you got to pay them a lot more than you are going to pay them to work in a nursing home. People work in a nursing home because they're helping people. People work in an abortion clinic because it makes them a lot of money. And so this idea that it's this altruistic for women thing kind of goes out the window there. And then you also have the eugenicists that are behind the abortion industry. And I think I remind everybody every time this comes up, minorities abort per capita, not individually, but per capita. Minorities abort at a higher rate than white women. And I think that was a goal. You see a lot more abortion clinics in neighborhoods that have a higher minority population. You see abortion promotion targeting those neighborhoods. And I don't think it's an accident. It's not just a circumstance of economics. It's not a circumstance of, who will rent to them. A lot of them, they own the land they're on. It's deliberate, and it's not altruistic. And it's, as much as people want to believe that this is a pro-woman position, it's not necessarily exploitation of women, because adult women are capable of making their own decisions, right? Adult women are, if they're intelligent enough to decide whether or not to have sex in the first place, they should be intelligent enough to see through this shit. And in the case of a lot of adult women, it is willful blindness that they make this choice. I consider it rather barbaric, actually. Solve my problems by killing my kids, right?
Yeah.
But so it's not that women are innocent in this.
No, but I think like these extremists would like to see a Planned Parenthood on every corner, just like McDonald's.
I think they would too.
You know what I mean?
And they make it a women's issue because it's easier to force it through that way. You can get people to agree to it if you say it's a women's issue.
Right. Right. It's the woman's issue. It's only the woman's issue, and it has nothing to do. And this is another thing that really pisses me off about this whole argument, is that 95, if not all of the conversation is focused around the woman. There's no conversation happening around what happens to a man in that situation. What happens to a man who has his child aborted? Men go through depression behind that just as much as women, if not more, because there's nothing that they can do. So, it's really a selfish thing. because it's just about what the woman wants. It's not about the kid. It's not about the father. It's not about anything else but what that woman wants.
Yeah, there
And
are three sets of rights here,
Mhm.
right? You know, and we know that at least after 24 weeks, the fetus has rights, because the fetus can be considered the victim of a crime after 24 weeks in many jurisdictions, right? If somebody induces an abortion against a woman's will after 24 weeks, that fetus can be considered the victim of a homicide, right? Because it's a viable fetus, maybe 25 weeks. So we know that at least after that point, we're balancing three sets of rights here, right? And the woman gets to decide whether anybody else has any rights whatsoever, right? So the woman can go to the man and say, do you want to keep it, or do you want me to abort it? And if he says one or the other, she doesn't have to follow his opinion, and she can essentially say, well, I'm going to abort it, and violate his rights in that way. Or she can keep it and then go after child support, even if he didn't want the kid, even if he wanted her to abort it. She can go after him and violate his rights in that way. She gets to decide that. She gets to decide the life or death of the baby. She gets to decide whether the baby is a person under the law, right? Because even though if she was a random person that resulted in a miscarriage after 25 weeks, she could charge him with a homicide. If she chooses to induce a miscarriage herself after 25 weeks, then that's perfectly fine. And the law seems to see that as perfectly acceptable. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because what you're essentially saying is that the rights of three individuals lie within the say-so of a single person, right? She gets to decide everything for everybody. And that's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any kind of legal. So, you know, the fact that that's the law of the land in a lot of places in the U.S. and certainly in Canada is absolutely atrocious.
And it's the furthest thing from equality that you can describe.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You know, and it really goes to show, I think, that, you know, the sort of the feminist contempt for motherhood, that they would be fighting for abortion at any point in a pregnancy. Right? Like, I was actually talking to somebody on Reddit. You can go see who I've been responding to. And I discussed with him a paper written by two alleged medical ethicists, arguing that post-birth abortion should be legal for the mother, that it should exist up until age 18 months to 2 years, that women should be allowed to commit infanticide, and that should be perfectly legal, right? And their argument was actually quite interesting. I found it quite interesting. They essentially said, well, what if you had a lottery ticket in your pocket and you had no idea it was a winner, right? You had no idea it was like the jackpot winner, like $27 million or something like that, and you lost it before you ever realized it was a winner. You wouldn't be aware that you had lost that $27 million. So they argued that until children have developed a concept of tomorrow, a concept of permanence and future, right, then taking their life away, to them, from the child's perspective, you're not taking anything away, because they're not aware that they have it, right? And so I found the argument quite interesting. It was actually quite compelling in its way, right? And this guy, he's like, well, that's just okay. We're on our way there. I can't really see any flaws in that argument. And I'm just like, yeah, that then you're talking about euthanizing kids with Down syndrome who have IQs of like 40, right? You're talking about euthanizing adults with dementia. You're talking about euthanizing
the Ricky Berwicks of the world who
yeah.
actually have something to contribute.
Yeah. No, and you're talking and taking that choice out of their hands, right? Making that decision for them, right? Like I don't have a huge problem with assisted suicide for mentally fit individuals, right? And I don't have a problem with the living will for somebody who, like my father, is losing his marbles, but has not completely lost them yet. In fact, I'm quite angry at my mother-in-law for ignoring my father-in-law's living will. I think he would have wanted to die about 4 years before she allowed the process to take place. She kept taking heroic measures and all of this to prolong his life, and I think he would not have wanted that. But based on what things that he said when he was still in his right mind, right? But what you're looking at is a situation where you have a life, and you just decide that, like, literally the child's right to a potential life and to the potential of knowing and becoming aware of permanence and a future, right, is superseded by the idea that if the mother adopted the child out, the mother would always have some kind of psychological difficulty with knowing that the child was out there. And I'm like, part of me as a mother is like, even if my kid was taken from me by force, right, by hostile actors, if I had some way of knowing that my child was alive and my child was okay, I mean, it wouldn't make me, it wouldn't bring the optimum happiness, right? But I'd certainly prefer that to knowing that they were dead. Bring to bear arguments that would allow you to terminate your child's life at age 1.5 or 2 years, not because they were in an incredible situation where they're suffering, right? And decided to pull the plug because they had some kind of blood cancer or something like that, or they were, they had harlequin ichthyosis and they'd already lost all their fingers and their toes and were had lost their eyesight and had like zero quality of life, right? A perfectly healthy child, right? And you are faced with a choice when they're 18 months old. Do I put it up for adoption because I can't handle it, or put it into care, right? Or do I kill it? And people are arguing that you should be able to kill it. Thinking, what kind of psychopath would do that? Why wouldn't you put it into care and then say, okay, shit together, I can try and get my kid back? You would have to not have any bond whatsoever with your child after 1.5 years. How the fuck does that happen? Well, we had medical ethicists. This was published in the British Journal of Medical Ethics that this should be allowed.
It's just, it really, cuts at me because, there was a couple of points in my life where I actually did want to have children, but, I think about the world that I would leave a child in, and I, I don't even feel comfortable leaving a child in this world. Forget about everything else. Like, how? Oh my God! Someone asked, would you rather have a boy or a girl? And that's a tough decision. I think a girl would have an easier time of life. But I think I would prefer to have a boy because I think I would be able to protect him better. I don't know, but again,
you would be the ideal parent for a boy, right? You're like essentially saying, well, a girl would be easy, a boy would be harder, but if a boy would be lucky to have me, is essentially what you're saying. Yeah. And I think that's a valid point. I think that's an absolutely valid point.
I mean, unfortunately, I'm not sure which, but I won't have kids. I'm not. That's it. That's the end for me. So, and I'm okay with that. I am and I'm not. Like, I would have loved to have had a child to bring up. It would give me something else to do. But I really don't see. Here's my problem. I have a problem figuring out or just I don't see a reason to have children that is not selfish. So that's something that I could never really come to grips with. Like, why do you have kids? I want to have kids because what? You want to see what your child would look like? Or it's just something that happened in the moment, or, it happened and then you have that maternal instinct. I don't know. That has never happened for me. I've never had to even have that question. I've never been pregnant. I've not once in my life. So I guess I'm just removed from that situation. So I don't know. It's interesting to it's an interesting question to think about, but I don't really think that having kids would benefit me in my life where I am right now, outside of like a tax benefit, honestly, and just the the feeling of usefulness. Because that's what I don't have. I have my dog and I don't really have anyone else outside of my small family that I don't really talk to. So I don't know. This whole conversation is really interesting to me. And I don't know. Would my life be better if I had kids? I don't know. And I think I'm thankful that I don't have them because I am in the station that I'm in life right now, and I'm able to look at it all from an objective perspective. So yeah,
I would just point out most parents out there will tell you they're very glad that their kids were born. I mean, you can consider it selfish and everything, but no. A parent dedicates their life to for at least the time it takes for the child to become completely independent, and that can be longer than 18 years. Dedicates their life to the care and welfare of their child. There's a lot of things you give up for that, and it's not necessarily bad, but that's a decision that people make, and it's responsible to make that decision for yourself and take measures to prevent pregnancy in the first place if you have decided that you don't want to be a child. I will say,
but
when you get into the discussion on abortion is a violent solution to that problem. And it's the only time it's not overtly violent is when you use something like the morning after pill, or even an IUD can be considered somewhat violent, and because it scrapes the baby out, or is intended to kill in a particular way. But it's an abortive thing as well. But preventing pregnancy from taking place in the first place, so that you don't end up in a situation where the doctor's going in with forceps and doing something that is a little more brutal than, say, the morning after pill, which, these are things I still don't like. I wouldn't advise a girl to use the morning after pill as her primary means of birth control. I wouldn't advise a girl to use an implanted device as her primary means of birth control, because there's a bunch of things that can go wrong with it too. I wouldn't advise a girl to use anything as her primary means of birth control but a condom. For the same reason I would advise men, because you can prevent pregnancy.
A diaphragm.
Yeah, well, no. Condoms are better. And there is one specific reason, and one specific reason alone, why condoms are superior to everything else. Nothing else prevents the exchange of bodily fluids on the level that condoms do. So condoms end up protecting you from most STDs. They don't protect you from all of them. And that's the other end of it. I wouldn't advise any guy or gal, young man or young woman, certainly not teenagers, to buy into the bullshit around the sexual revolution, because what you're looking at is the random exchange of bodily fluids with a whole lot of other people. Even if you use a condom, you're still getting female bodily fluids on the guy, and you're still getting his perspiration on you. You're still dealing with the potential for transmission of bacteria and viruses that live on the skin. So you're still dealing with the risk of transmission of STDs. And I think we gave a pretty good PSA at the end of the last show on that. I'm going to, quote the 50% thing again. Even though it doesn't mean that half the people are infected, we do have a 50% infection rate in the American population. So if somebody is infected, there's a chance they might have more than one thing. And you don't necessarily know it. You can't necessarily look at someone and know that they're infected with an STD. So every time that you have sex with somebody, you're taking a risk.
You know what's hilarious? The only infection a man can by observation.
You skipped there. The only infection a man what?
A man can know by observation is bacterial vaginosis, and that's not sexually transmittable to men.
No, but it is very off-putting.
It is very off-putting. Yeah. It's very off-putting, and I can transmittable from woman to woman. Saying.
I'm not concerned about the STDs, but you've got me thinking about this IUD that I just had put in.
Well, one of the risks of an IUD is that it can actually do damage to your uterus, and even if you don't want to have kids, there's a danger there.
But I want to know, how old are you?
I'm 40.
Why don't
you just get your tubes tied?
That's what I said. And she said, you're going to have to go in for surgery and blah, blah, blah. We'll just put the IUD in. But that's what I wanted, was my tubes tied.
Never let them talk you out of that when that's what you want. Same with guys in vasectomy. You want a vasectomy and your doctor says no, go to a different doctor.
All right, fuck this.
Okay, I do want to tell you, Lauren, that if you've never been pregnant and you've never had a kid yet and you're 40 years old, chances are you're not going to conceive.
Yeah, I don't think it's
it's highly unlikely.
Yeah.
And so essentially, because like the earlier you have your first kid, the more likely you are to be able to conceive when you're 40. After 35, it's difficult to conceive, right? And so
At your peak, you only have a 20% chance every time you have sex, on average. Karen might be a little different, but an average average woman
I
has
have a
20%.
100%. I have a 100% chance when I borrow somebody's toothbrush.
Yeah. That's not where you're supposed to put it.
I
And then you gotta wonder who they've been blowing.
They don't have. They don't have
I'm
teeth
not Jesus.
down there. They don't have teeth down there, Karen.
Oh God, you gotta look up vagina dentata now.
I'm almost positive my third child was the result of anal sex. So, like, let's just.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we are going to wrap up the response portion of the show, and I'm going to go into the live chats because we have a bunch of them. We will do the next 5 next week. So we started out at the beginning of the show with Apollo the Leader, who gave us $5 and said, "Here's a tip." And there's a joke about the whole thing in there, but I think it might not be YouTube appropriate, so I won't.
It's just the tip. It's just the tip.
So DVID22 gave us, I'm thinking that's David22, gave us $2 and said the argument is pro-abortion versus anti-abortion. And pretty much, there are people who are, a lot of people who are actually for choice and informed choice at that, call themselves pro-life because they're not pro-abortion, they're against abortion, and they're for everything you can do to prevent abortion, but don't necessarily agree with legislation on the topic because it won't make the difference that education and social attitude changes would make. I think changing social attitudes, personally, like I said, I have a lot of people, I'll tell them my position. Why do you call yourself pro-life? You're pro-choice. I'm not. I'm not pro-choice. I am pro-education. And I don't think anybody with a full set of the information on the topic and a full understanding of the ethics and the potential consequences to themselves and society would lightly choose abortion. I don't think the industry would exist because I don't think there would be enough business to support it if social attitudes changed and if women didn't have the excuse of buying into it's just tissue. Even in the second trimester. By the way, when you get into the third trimester where feminists advocate for abortion, if you're a mother and you're carrying a female baby at 20 weeks, I think it is. Actually, no, I think it's 16 weeks. 16 weeks, her ovaries are formed and there are eggs in them. So you have inside your body a body that contains the zygotes that could become your grandchildren. So there's another profoundly weird...
Gametes.
Yeah, you're right. Not zygotes, gametes. But in any case, it doesn't either justify or I can't think of the word. But it doesn't the topic itself. And you really have to understand the topic of human biology and gestation if you're going to make sentient arguments. If you're going to make thoughtful, intelligent arguments on the topic of abortion. But in any case, yeah, it is. It's pro-abortion versus anti-abortion. Breakfast Potatoes gave us $10 and said, I brought up paper abortions in a Facebook debate with a pro-choice feminist. She said that I should keep it in my pants if I don't want to take responsibility, oblivious to her hypocrisy. And they are. I don't like the term paper abortions because I think parental surrender on the part of the father is more along the lines of
legal paternal surrender.
Yeah, legal paternal surrender bears more similarity to safe haven abandonment than it does to abortion because the baby isn't dead. You're just not accepting parental status, which is what a woman does with safe haven abandonment or adoption, is that she chooses to abandon parental status but doesn't kill the baby. But yeah, feminists are total hypocrites on this. As soon as it gets turned around, okay, yeah, you know, will agree to your abortions, but fathers should then have the right to opt out of parenthood as well. It's keep it in your pants, you know, if you don't want to take responsibility.
Yeah, it's sick, and you know, every time they try to say that yeah, men have a choice, or men should have kept it in their pants. Well, okay, well, they didn't, and neither did you, and so now here we are. But you are the one that has the choice. You are the one that has the option. Men don't.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and honestly, even men don't even have the option for safe haven abandonment if they get caught. It's kidnapping when they do it, right? They've taken the baby away from the mother and abandoned the baby in some safe haven abandonment center. The mother goes to the cops, and the father gets charged. If a mother does that, it's not considered kidnapping. You know, she's not going to get busted for that. Now, the abandonment centers are required to try to find out if there's a father and try to inform the father in a lot of places. But it's not universal. In a lot of places, they are. They're by law, they're required. I looked this up, but it's not enforced very well.
In 4 jurisdictions, there is
in the United States, it's actually more than that.
Really? Because that has changed then since the last time I looked at it. Because the last time I looked at it in the States, there were only 4 states that actually had a process by which the father of the child could be... And I'm not talking about putative father registries, right? Because those are bullshit, right? I'm talking about if your kid was dropped off at a hospital and you had no idea that kid was yours, right? That there is no process there other than in 4 states, right? Other than the putative, I had sex with this chick one night, I might be a father, I'm going to put myself on the registry.
Right. But there is a intake interview when the mother drops off the baby, that is expected and required, but it's not enforced. If it doesn't happen, you know, if the person writes down, well, actually, she just abandoned the baby and left, she refused. They're not expected to try to.
No, she can't
talk the woman into it at all.
She can't even be coerced to give her own identity.
No, but the word coercion gets used even when someone isn't being coerced. You know, what are they going to tell her? We won't take the baby. But when someone simply gives you the hard sell, hey, can you give me some information? We really need some information. We're going to get in trouble if we don't get this information. You're not being coerced. You can still turn it down. But nobody comes along and says, did you guys really try to get that information, or did you just let her walk out? But they are required to try to get that information. So it's like, the law exists, but it's in name only. But in any case, and it doesn't, I don't think even in the 4 jurisdictions that it originally existed, I don't think it ever had any teeth. But in the meantime, you know, if a man comes in and drops the baby off that way, and it gets back, you know, the mother reports the child missing, he's going to be in trouble for kidnapping. And if they take a baby from a man without questioning him, they might get in more trouble than if they did with a woman. So it's very unequal there. You know, men don't have any option like that.
Yeah, no. If a man takes, well, here's the thing, right? Because the birth mother has default legal custody of the child. And if the father is not married to her, he has no legal right to the child by default. None whatsoever. Right? He has default legal responsibilities, but he has no default right. So he has no right to take that child from her custody. That would be custodial interference and kidnapping, right? And so if he takes that child from her against her will, you know, okay, so he might be able to go to a safe haven site and drop the baby off and say, you know, me and my girlfriend decided that we can't handle this, and here you go, right? Okay. he doesn't even have to give her name, right? If this has been done against her will, all she has to do is contact the authorities and say, my baby was taken and by the father and abandoned. Do you know where it is? And then she gets the baby back and support bill and a custodial interference and kidnapping, right? Like, they don't even have to track her down. She knows she's had a kid, right? She knows she's had a kid. She knows the kid's been taken from her arms by somebody against her will and abandoned at a safe haven site. She knows all of that, right? She's in a biologically privileged position to have knowledge of all of this, right? And therefore she has some recourse. But if some woman, just had sex with a guy, maybe she dated him for 3 months, she got pregnant, she broke up with him, never told him she was pregnant, abandoned his baby, he's got no way to know she was even pregnant. He doesn't know to go looking. He doesn't know that there's a kid out there that he could take custody of. He has no idea.
Exactly. Men are just like, they are.
I mean, like, some of it's just biological reality, right? Like, some just like stuff that can't be helped, right? But, when it comes to all of this shit, like, women are sitting in this incredibly privileged position where they get to make all of the fucking decisions. And she can abandon the baby against wishes, right? Over his wishes. She can do that. And okay, maybe the authorities will find out who he is and allow him to have custody. But they're not going to fucking put a child support obligation on her.
No. And she, on top of that, she can point the finger at any man and without proof just can get him hooked up on child support and extract money from him.
Well, one of the most horrific things about that is that most of the women who do that, like most of the women that you hear about who do that, they put some guy's name on the birth certificate and or gave some guy's name to the welfare system, right? They're not seeing a dime of that money. The government the state is essentially saying, we won't give you welfare until you name the father.
Mm-hmm.
And then she doesn't even maybe know who the father is. She just says he's Bill Jones in Santa Barbara, right? And the way the system worked in Santa Barbara was they would just like deliver papers summoning the guy to court to contest paternity. But apparently in Santa Barbara County, up until recently, I don't know if they've changed it yet, but they were talking about it. They could serve court papers, they could serve a summons by regular mail, right? And they'd go for some guy named Bill Jones, right? There's like 20 Bill Joneses in the area, and they just pick one, and she described a 6 foot tall, dark haired Bill Jones, and they're like, okay, well, this 5'7" red-headed Bill Jones fits the bill closely enough. We'll send him a notice to appear in court and contest paternity. And then he's on vacation or he moved, right? Because they sent it by the U.S. Postal Service, not by a process server, right? So he didn't get it, and then he doesn't show up to court, and there's a default judgment, yes, a finding of paternity. Obviously, he's not contesting it, so he's admitting he's the father. And the first thing he knows about it is when 80% of his wages get garnished, and he's like, what the fuck is going on? And then it's a $30,000 ordeal to apply to the court repeatedly to get a DNA test to disprove paternity over a kid by a woman he's never even met. And then when he's finally exonerated of paternal responsibility, and they say, okay, you are not the father. I am Maury Povich, and you are not the father, right? They say, well, we can't give you any of your child support back that you've paid over the last 3 years, in addition to the $30,000 trying to exonerate yourself, because since there was a valid court order in place, the child support agency had every right to get money and take it.
Now, I have a question. Do you think that if women were held accountable for
to even like 1/10 the degree that men are?
If they were held accountable, do you think that would increase the amount of abortions that women had, or do you think it would decrease that? And
no, I think it would increase the amount of careful sex women had.
That would be my hope, but yeah.
That's my thinking too. I think if women couldn't exploit government power to extort a man for child support, they wouldn't be as lax about preventing pregnancy in the first place. I also think if abortion was not available, women would not be as lax about preventing pregnancy in the first place. And I think the combination of the two has caused a dramatic increase in the number of men who are saddled with child support debt, because the availability of ways out like that, ways out of responsibility for women, those are compounded. Even women who will never have an abortion are more careless because the women around them are more careless, and there's a culture of carelessness among women because of abortion.
Okay,
Yes.
I would say that no, it's not child support that's doing it, right? At least not among the socioeconomic class of people who are having the most abortions, who are extracting child support. No, like what the issue is that there's a welfare system, right? And the welfare system would exist with or without child support. The welfare system enforces child support because it wants to get some of its money back, right? But if there was no man to hold responsible, if the man was dead, if the man was, permanently disabled, if he was incarcerated, serving life in prison, if any of that, right, the system would give her the welfare anyway, and the child support doesn't benefit her. The child support, every fucking penny of child support they collect just goes to pay back the welfare she's collecting, right? So none of it, like, it doesn't increase her check. They deduct it off of her monthly welfare check. Oh, we're collecting $300 a month of child support on her behalf. We'll take $300 a month off her off of her welfare check. That's how it works, right? And so it's not even a matter of child support. It's a matter of the welfare system. It's a matter of the system being prepared to bail women out of their choices. And it's not even, and then the system says we need men to help bail us out of our choices, to bail women out of theirs. That's what it is, right? So these women, the welfare queens, the women that Tommy Sotomayor talks about, right? The hood rats and the women with 15 kids by like 18 different dads, right? I'm being facetious there,
Yes.
but like, they're not benefiting from that child support. They're not. They're just collecting the base level of welfare, and their baby daddies are repaying the state for money that the state essentially said, you can have it no matter what. We just want to know who we can,
Tag your it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about transferring responsibility.
Yeah.
And this is why so many women do support. Like, now, I will say this.
They want to be as responsible as they want to hold men.
Right. And I will say this. and this is something that it's hard to find it on Google, but I've seen it before, and the actual membership of organizations like National Right to Life and your state level Right to Life and stuff like that will consist of more women and teen girls than men and teen boys. So you will find among the pro-life movement that's either primarily or at least majority female. But when it comes to, like, even a lot of pro-lifers, when it comes to taking responsibility for the product of a conception, right? Taking full responsibility. This is my decision. I chose to have sex. I chose to fail at birth control, even though I have 11 different categories that I could choose from. And then I carried the child to term, gave birth. A large majority of women expect the guy to take responsibility not just for his part in it that leads up to conception, but for her choice to carry to term, her choice to give birth, her choice to retain custody, and her choice to not attempt to mitigate the consequences, the financial consequences of bringing a child into her household, not just the world, but her household, and taking responsibility for that child by earning enough money. We're doing the work it takes to earn enough money, taking the risk it takes to earn enough money to support that child. Making a baby with a man that she wasn't going to marry or who wasn't going to marry her. He's to take all that responsibility, even though his choice ends at attempting to prevent conception. And his choice in yes or no is somewhat mitigated, not genuinely mitigated, but somewhat mitigated by the fact that people judge men for turning sex down with women on a level that they do not do to women for turning down sex with men. So like that, yeah, that's a big one. I think if you had a social and legal system that did not coddle women, women would be more careful. But getting a large segment of the female population to fight for their own accountability, to fight to be held accountable by the state and by society, or to not have their accountability compromised by safety nets, that's a hurdle that I don't think that we're going to jump. Not in today's social attitudes. Social attitudes would have to change, and a lot of young women would have to come to the understanding that I've come to, that you can't achieve greatness without accountability. You have to have accountability in all things, and the reason that women don't make it to positions of prestige and authority and responsibility in the numbers that men do is because they lack that accountability. And because they don't practice that accountability, they don't earn those positions.
Right. Exactly, and that is precisely the reason why we criticize Mary Sue's. Every Mary Sue character, they did not earn that credit. They didn't earn it. So, yeah.
They didn't go through a personal journey towards expertise.
Right.
No, and not only did they not go through a personal journey towards expertise, they cannot be relied upon by the employer. They cannot be relied upon by the community at large. They can't be criticized on the same level as men if they do something wrong, if they make a decision that results in consequences that, say, their employer or the community they represent face. It's why I say we can't have a woman president right now. We really can't afford a president who cannot be criticized. One of the, love Trump or hate him, one of the best things about him is you can say anything about him. And there isn't something about Trump that he can say, you're just saying that because I'm fill in the blank.
Right.
And be taken seriously. He could say, you're just saying that because I'm a man, and people would be like, yeah, you're a man, so what? You're just saying that because I'm a Republican. Yes, you're a Republican, so what? You know, a lot of people would say, well, yeah, Republicans are evil, right? So he has no shield, none. And that's important. And I don't think a president should have a shield against accountability. A president shouldn't have a shield against criticism. They should have common sense and logical arguments against it, but not a shield that prevents people from criticizing them. And I will never vote for a woman for president or for Congress or for Senate or governor or state level position that runs on vote for me because I'm a woman, or argues you can't make that criticism because I'm a woman, or doesn't say anything and just stands by and allows her supporters to do that. None. You know, that's vital that we not have that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, this is one of the things that I was talking about with one of the right-wing radio show hosts I did an interview with recently. And she said, you know, Pete Buttigieg had sort of essentially challenged Trump by saying, you know, I look forward as the candidate for president for the Democratic Party to debate President Trump on the definition and the nature of traditional marriage. And I was like, why would he fucking do that? No wonder he dropped in the polls immediately after he said that, right? Like, same-sex marriage is a moot point. It's off the table. It's done. It's done deal, right? Like, we can shut up about it now. It's the law in every state now, right? Okay, so we can shut up about it. So why would you bring that up other than to make your homosexuality a primary, I guess, merit, as Hillary Clinton put it? You know, I want to be elected on my merits, and one of my merits is that I'm a woman. Yeah, no, and he's like, one of my merits is that I'm gay, and I got the gay agenda, and he's drawing attention to the fact that he's gay, and all of a sudden, over a moot point, a point that's been decided, right? It's done. It's over, right? And he's still harping on it. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what are you doing? Don't you realize that the rank and Democrats, that they like Joe Biden? Because at least most Americans can get behind the idea that violence against women is wrong. So even if they're aware of the fact that he was the one who put through the Violence Against Women Act, right? Most Americans are not going to see that as like disqualifying. But other than that, he's straight, he's old, he's white, he's male, he can be criticized.
Right, he's just about the only Democrat that can be. The rest that are running either have they're female, or they're gay, or they're an ethnic minority, or you know, you don't really have anybody that's running in the what is it, 20 people now that are running for the Democrat primary.
The only person that I can think of, right, who is not an old straight white male, who could stand a chance, who would actually do well and stand a chance against Trump, is Tulsi Gabbard.
Right. Yeah. And I think there will still be a problem of people saying, you know, well, because she's female, you can't criticize her, because if you're misogynistic if you criticize her.
No, I actually think she would resist that. I mean, she served.
I would have to see her do it.
No, she has. Like, I've watched her being interviewed on a number of occasions. She does not play identity politics. That's why she's like.
No, I mean, I would actually have to personally see her speak out against it, not just like, that's the thing. I wouldn't even vote for a woman who sat back and let other people say that and said nothing about, you know, hey, don't do that. This is not what I'm running on.
Yeah, I don't think even Jimmy Dore, you know, Jimmy Dore from the Young Turks.
Yeah.
He left the Young Turks a while ago. You know, he's not pointing out that, oh, you know, she's trailing in the polls and everything because of sexism or because of racism or anything. He's talking about how she's trailing in the polls because she's sensible on things like free speech and freedom and all of that. She's also sensible on let's just give not trying to change foreign regimes a try for a while and see how that works for our foreign policy, right? Let's try not overthrowing foreign governments, through our meddling and our interference. Let's give that a go and see how that works out, because I've seen, I used to have I was the person who did the daily casual count for 7 years. And
she did correctly identify that people voted for Trump because too many politicians put themselves ahead of the people. She did correctly identify that that people didn't vote for Trump because they're sexist, racist, misogynistic, homophobic, whatever, but because the politicians got too big for their britches.
Yeah, no, like I think, and
but
I think
she has apologized for her past LGBT positions already.
Oh yeah, her past, when she was a teenager and she was raised in a religious household, and her father was engaged in conversion therapy, and she helped him out with that as a 14-year-old. Oh yeah,
I don't think she should apologize for that. She might come out and say, "Well, that's not my position now, and I've learned a lot of things, and people's positions change from between teenage years and adulthood." But apologizing for it is problematic in my view. I don't think people should apologize for their teenage views. I had some really dumb views when I was a teenager, because teenagers don't know everything. When I was a teenager, I would have said yes, outlaw abortion, absolutely, all except for to prevent the death of the mother due to the complications from the gestation of a fetus that wouldn't live long enough to survive a C-section birth.
Okay, well, I think all of this is just emblematic of the Tulsi Gabbard is just too soon. Okay. Yes, I agree with both.
Tulsi Gabbard is just too sane.
Well, too sane and too soon, because this Trump train I don't think is going to stop, and I don't think that there's not going to be Trump at the end of 2024. And I love Tulsi Gabbard. I love what she's saying. I like what she's doing, but I don't think that the people have come off of the high of what Trump has been doing. The people have not been turned off by Trump. His approval rating is just going up. So for them to then pivot off of him and then latch onto her, I don't really see that happening. She's just not that exciting enough.
Right.
So,
well, and she is still a progressive.
Yeah.
Which does, now, I would vote for a progressive Democrat white man, before I voted for a Republican woman. Unless, again, she satisfied that condition of actually actively speaking out against using the misogyny card, and demanded accountability, equal accountability. Yeah. She would, I wouldn't even... and a libertarian woman, same thing. I would vote for an authoritarian progressive Democrat man right now before I would trust even a libertarian woman if she accepted other people using the misogyny card on her behalf. I wouldn't accept that.
I agree with you 100,000%.
If it's just a progressive against against a libertarian or a constitutionalist conservative or even a religious conservative, a lot of the problems in this country today are due to progressive initiatives getting out of hand and going down the path of we have to take care of everybody. Nobody can make their own decisions. The nanny state and the tax and spend state, and it would also depend on I do like the idea of a candidate that says we really need to stop being the world police. I do like that, and that would make a big difference for me too. And that if we got rid of that behavior from our country, we could cut a hell of a lot of taxes and save a hell of a lot of lives and stop creating or exacerbating conflicts all over the world. But yeah, no, when it comes down to it, I honestly, a woman would have more to prove to me than a man, and it would have to start with, no, you can't use the misogyny card in relation to my campaign. I won't accept it. I want to be equally accountable. If I'm not equally accountable, then I'm not qualified. But back to the next one. Let's see. We stopped at taking responsibility. Tyler Preston gave us $2 and said Hollywood is truly evil. There's actually a lot of good in Hollywood. A lot of times it gets quashed. But there is actually a lot. It's elitism that is evil. It's the Bertha Better Than You crowd that is evil. Everybody's fucked up in one way or another. And everybody has to fight their demons, work tooth and nail, fight tooth and nail to exercise their own personal accountability. But elitists get away with being completely unaccountable and making demands of everybody. They're basically sociopaths. And Hollywood is very attractive to them. They can get away with it easier there. But there's good still in Hollywood. It's just hard to find. Crawl Dragon gave us $5 and said, y'all got real deep when I was away fixing my software updater. Have a tip for that, and for making me think of my parents screwing while you did. But you know what? That's just a sign they're not going to get divorced anytime soon, right? Mr. Roboto gave us $5 and said, what we need is a census like the Kinsey scale to know the reason situation in order to best combat future teen pregnancy. And personally, I do think it's the accountability issue. We have a dramatic imbalance in personal accountability, a dramatic gender imbalance. And that dramatic gender imbalance allows women to be impulsive and to encourage men to be impulsive in ways that are unwise and unhealthy. And the younger you get, when you get into the teenage years, teenagers they're going to have a tendency to be impulsive anyway. And then we have this massive push in the education profession to encourage that impulsivity. That is really dangerous. And I'm against abstinence-only education because there's a lot of information kids should have. But I'm also against abstinence-exclusive education, which is what is being practiced in a lot of schools now at the behest of the National Education Association. I think that's a major problem.
Yeah, no, and I think, honestly, when you actually look at the sort of the number of out-of-wedlock births, right? And I mean, part of that is a result of things like shotgun weddings, right? People who just stepped up and took responsibility when they accidentally got pregnant as single individuals. But when you actually look at the fewer birth control options, the fewer contraceptive options women had, the fewer abortions were performed, right? And then all of a sudden you have this plethora of contraceptive options that are, 95 to 99.5% effective if you use them properly, right? And somehow we've seen abortion skyrocketing, right? And it's and out of wedlock births, right? And all of these things, these are all skyrocketing. They're all going up, right? And it's I have to wonder to myself, right, that women are more in control of their fertility than they have ever been, and yet they have more oopses than they have ever had. And that's a little bit fucking weird, isn't it?
Yep. And I honestly, I think it's a combination of the safety nets and the, I would say, targeted effort at teaching girls that they don't have to be accountable and they don't have to be responsible.
Yeah. I was watching the Carl's debates that he was having, and there was an actual doctor that stood up and said, well, there was 197,000 abortions. And I don't know, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I guarantee you, if you compare that with the number of rapes that were reported, the number of children that are being aborted, if you're trying to use rape as an argument for abortion, you're failing, because I'm very sure that the percentage of rapes is vastly lower than the number of abortions that are happening. So it is not just rape; it is women's unaccountability. Now, if that's a lack of education, then fine, let's do that. Okay. Now, I'd like to tell a story. I remember when I was maybe 15 years old, and I was in my health class, and this was like the period was over. It was towards the end of the semester, so there was really no school, no class happening. It was just, we were all like packed up and ready to go, and we were talking, and the teacher asked if anyone had any questions, and I asked, is there any reason that a teenager should not have a child? Like, is there any real reason that, because I, at that time, was interested. I wanted to have kids, even though I hadn't even been having sex. I wanted to have a child. I wanted to know if there was a reason that I should not be allowed, or if there was some kind of moral or physiological reason that I should not do it. And what I got was a non-answer. So what that said to me was that our education system, even though they are trying to teach you health, they don't really, I guess they have their hands tied in some situations. They can't really say that you should or shouldn't, but this system is broken. It is broken. We are not teaching children how to not have children. We're not even teaching them that it's something that they shouldn't do, because we don't even teach our kids how to balance a fucking checkbook by the time they graduate high school. We don't prepare them for life at all in any situation. We used to, but yep. Common Core took over, and that it's gone.
Yeah, Common Core's a mess. By the way, the CDC reports that in 2015, that's the latest year I could find. In 2015, 638,169 abortions were reported to the CDC from 49 reporting areas, and the way they work, I know the 2009 report, which actually had even more. There was it was rising steadily for the longest time, and then there's been a slow, very slight decline over the last few years. In 2009, it was 784,507 reported, and at that time, the majority of those, 98.5%, were from the 45 reporting areas that provided data every year during the 2000 to 2009 time span. So, like, they have data from those 45 areas that they actually can look at patterns over time. And, yeah, it's... and most abortions... The other thing you hear people talking about, the number of... thousands of women will be in trouble if you outlaw third-term abortions or, second... Most abortions are first-term. The vast majority of abortions are first-term. And the 2009 report actually says, was it, it's right, it was right here, and I moved to the damn page. Yeah, there we go. 91.7 were performed at under 13 weeks. 64% were under 8 weeks. very few were performed over 14 weeks. 7% at 14 to 20 weeks, and even fewer, 1.3%, were at 21, or more. So you're looking at this almost no abortions are even performed at those later stages, and so the idea that this is going to just cause an epidemic of women unable to access abortions if like these laws that are limiting, like the heartbeat law and stuff like that people are objecting to, actually would not even affect the vast majority of abortions. Women would simply, because women simply have them earlier. So
I remember going with a friend to get an abortion. She was probably 18, and there was no. It was just, do you have the money? There's no
right. They don't
consideration. They don't ask, is the father of this child present, and is he accountable? Does he care? No. Do you have the money to pay for it? Yep. Okay. That's it. Boom.
Yeah.
Done.
Yep. Very, very little in the way of counseling. Very little in the way of enforced regulation. Like, there are regulations. There are a lot of regulations that get kind of ignored. It's an industry. They got a product, they're selling it, and they will get around the law as much as humanly possible, and they use the loaded nature of the topic to do that. But going on,
they've got a product, and they're selling it, and they're selling the byproducts of that product.
That's true.
Which is even more just disgusting.
Jack Tint gave us $10 and said, "This is the first time I've caught you live in a while. Thanks for doing what you do and talking me off the ledge last year. I am now all better with a big paycheck, or a paycheck big enough to donate. So take some." And thank you very much, Jack. And I'm really glad that we talked you off the ledge last year. I'm very glad that you're better. Hopefully that stays that way. And Bendolin Rax gave us $20 Canadian and gave us a bunch of emojis, and some of them aren't actually showing properly on my screen. Then we have Kenny Jones gave us $2 and said, "What do you guys think of the Pro Jared fiasco?" That's going to have to be for another show because it's 10 o'clock, and it's just going to have to be for another show. Sorry, guys. But with that, I am going to shut us down. Boy, we spent like an hour, more than an hour, I think, going over just the... Well, no, we spent more than half an hour going over the Super Chats. So we might have to start the Super Chats earlier next time. I have to leave for work at 11. But in the meantime...
Did we even get halfway through the list?
Yeah, we did get halfway through the list. We will do the second half of the list next week. So be ready to address 5 more things that Alyssa Milano accidentally said in the subcontext of her call for a sex strike. And in the meantime, I will thank everybody for listening to us. Thanks to my co-hosts for the lively discussion. And thanks to everybody who super chatted us. And thanks to everybody that donates to help make this happen. And everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk. Night all.